The forest was silent that evening, except for the sound of dry leaves breaking under his boots. The human man, Daniel, had walked this path hundreds of times, but tonight something felt different. The air was heavier, the silence deeper. As if the woods themselves were holding their breath, Daniel stopped, turning his head slowly. Somewhere close, he had heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whimper. It was not the cry of an animal, not the voice of a bird, but something softer, weaker, filled with fear. His instincts pulled him toward the sound. He pushed through tall grass and broken branches, moving carefully. The sound grew clearer. A trembling breath, a child's muffled sob. And then he saw her. At the base of a large tree, half hidden under fallen leaves and dirt, was a little girl. But she was not human. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, pale silver blue, and her large eyes reflected the last rays of the setting sun like twin jewels. Her small frame was covered in rags, her hair tangled, her body shivering as if she had been out there for days. Daniel froze, his heart beating faster. He had seen aliens before, from far away in the markets and trading posts, but never this, close and never a child. She looked fragile, weaker than any child should be, yet there was something about her presence that made the air feel electric. The little alien girl noticed him. Her eyes widened with terror, and she tried to push herself. Back against the tree, her lips trembled, and strange words spilled out in a tongue he could not understand, but the meaning was clear. She was begging him not to come closer. Daniel raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. His voice was calm, steady. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." Of course, she couldn't understand his language, but maybe his tone could tell her. Her breathing was sharp and quick, her small body curling tighter as if she expected to be struck. Daniel's chest ached at the sight. No child, alien or human, should look this broken. Very carefully, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread. He placed it on the ground, just a step away from her. Then he backed away, lowering himself to the ground to look less threatening. The girl's glowing eyes locked on the bread, her lips parting. For a moment, she did not move, only staring, torn between hunger and fear. Then her small hand, shaking and thin, reached forward. She snatched the bread and pulled it close, biting into it with desperate hunger. Tears slipped down her glowing cheeks as she ate, as if each bite was a fight. Between life and death, Daniel said nothing, only watched. And the more he watched, the more questions burned inside him. Why was she here? Why was she alone? And most of all, what had she been running from? The sun dipped lower, shadows growing longer across the forest floor. The girl shivered violently now, her fragile body unable to fight the cold. Daniel pulled off his jacket and laid it carefully beside her. Again she flinched, but when he stepped back, she reached for it slowly. She wrapped herself in the jacket, its size swallowing her completely. Daniel felt something inside him shift. This was no chance meeting, no simple discovery. It felt like the universe itself had placed this child in his path. And deep down, he knew. If he walked away now, she would not survive the night. Still, his mind raced with fear. Helping her could mean danger. If others were searching for her, if she belonged to some alien faction, then keeping her would put him directly in their path. But when he looked at her, her small frame curled up in his jacket, eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet still watching him with a fragile hope, he knew his choice was already made. He stood slowly, stretching out his hand toward her. "Come with me," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand. At first, she didn't move. Her tiny hands clutched the jacket tightly. Then, with the smallest hesitation, she reached her glowing fingers out and touched his hand. The touch was light, trembling, uncertain. Yet it was trust. A trust given to a stranger, a trust born of desperation and survival. Daniel lifted her gently, into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if she had eaten nothing in days. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shaky but calming. As he walked back toward his cabin, the forest behind him grew darker. But Daniel could not shake the feeling that he was not alone, that in the shadows unseen eyes were watching, And though he had found the little alien girl tonight, he also knew this was only the beginning of something far greater, something that would soon come knocking at his door. Daniel pushed open the door of his small wooden cabin, the hinges groaning in the quiet night. He carried the little alien girl inside, her fragile body still wrapped in his oversized jacket. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and stew, a safe and warm place compared to the cold, empty forest outside. He placed her gently on a chair near the fire. The flames painted her silver blue skin with a soft glow, making her look both strange and innocent. Her wide eyes darted around the room, at the books on the shelf, the tools on the wall, the steaming pot over the fire. Everything was foreign to her, yet her small hands clutched the jacket tighter, as if it was her shield against the unknown. Daniel knelt to her level, offering a cup of warm water. She hesitated, staring at it as if unsure whether it was safe. He took a small sip himself, then held it out again. This time, she reached forward with shaking fingers and took it, sipping carefully. Her throat worked. As she swallowed, her body relaxing slightly with each sip, the silence between them was heavy. She could not speak his language, and he could not speak hers, but there was something in her eyes, something that crossed every barrier. It was the look of someone who had known fear for too long, but now, for the first time, felt a glimpse of safety. Daniel brought a small bowl of stew, breaking soft bread, into it. When he set it in front of her, she froze again, her glowing eyes flicking from the bowl to his face. He nodded slowly, encouraging her. Finally, she lifted the spoon, spilling half of it on the table as her tiny hands trembled. She ate quickly, almost desperately, as if afraid the food might vanish if she waited too long. Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching her. Every movement told a story, though no words were spoken. The scars on her arms, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way she glanced often toward the door as if expecting it to burst open. Whoever she was running from something or someone. After she finished, her eyelids grew heavy, but she fought sleep, sitting stiff and alert, her hands gripping the jacket as though she feared it would be stolen. Daniel walked to the corner, pulled a blanket from the shelf and laid it over the small couch. He gestured for her to lie down, patting the blanket gently. At first she shook her head, eyes wide with mistrust. But when he stepped away and sat down at the table, she slowly slid off the chair and climbed onto the couch. Curling into a ball, she pulled the blanket up to her chin. Within minutes, her breathing softened, slow and steady. Her glowing eyes closed for the first time in what must have been days. Daniel watched the fire crackle, his thoughts racing. What was he doing? He had just brought an alien child into his home. If someone was looking for her, he would be in trouble. Serious trouble, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The image of her small, trembling figure in the forest was burned into his mind. If he hadn't found her, she might already be dead. The night stretched long, but Daniel didn't sleep. He sat near the window, listening. The forest outside seemed too quiet, as if holding a secret. At one point, he thought he saw movement between the trees, a flicker of shadow. But when he looked harder, nothing was there. Still, a feeling grew in his chest. They were not alone. Someone out there was searching. Morning came slowly, painting the cabin in pale light. The girl stirred, her glowing eyes blinking open. When she saw Daniel sitting at the table, she tensed, but then relaxed when she realized she was still safe. She sat up, her small fingers pressing against her chest as she whispered something, softly in her alien tongue. Daniel had no idea what the word meant, but her tone carried gratitude. Maybe she had said, "Thank you," or maybe just a sound of relief. The day passed quietly. She followed him around the cabin, always keeping a small distance but never letting him out of sight. When he chopped wood, she sat near the door, her thin legs swinging. When he cooked, she peeked over the counter, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity. A bond was forming, not of words, but of presence. She began to trust him, step by step, moment by moment, but with trust came a heavier question. Why was she here? Why had she been abandoned in the forest? And who were the shadows Daniel thought he had seen watching from the trees? That evening, as the sun fell again, Daniel noticed something strange. On the doorframe of his cabin, just near the ground, there were fresh claw marks, long and sharp, too precise to be from any wild animal. The little girl saw them too, her eyes widening with fear. She pressed close to him, clutching his sleeve, whispering a word again and again. Though he couldn't understand, the terror in her voice made his blood run cold. Daniel knew then, whatever she was hiding from had already found their trail, and soon his door would not be enough to keep them out. The night was colder than usual. The fire inside Daniel's cabin burned low, casting long flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The little alien girl slept curled tightly on the couch, the blanket wrapped around her small frame. Her glowing eyes were shut, but even in sleep her face carried fear, her hands gripping the fabric as though she was still fighting the world outside. Daniel sat near the window, his rifle resting against the wall beside him. He was not a soldier, anymore, not since he had left the war behind, but old instincts never fully died. Every sound outside, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, pulled his nerves tighter. And then he saw it, across the tree line, just for a moment. Something moved. Not an animal, not the wind. A tall shadow slipping silently between the trees. When he blinked, it was gone, but his pulse stayed sharp. Daniel turned back toward the girl. She shifted in her sleep, whispering words in her alien tongue. He couldn't understand the language, but he could understand the pain. It was the voice of a child who had lost everything. Morning arrived slowly, gray light filling the cabin. The girl woke with a start, sitting up straight, her glowing eyes darting to the door. She whispered that strange word again, the one she had used when she saw the claw marks. Her hand shook and Daniel knelt beside her, trying to calm her. "It's okay. You're safe here," he said softly. Even though he wasn't sure it was true, he checked the door. The marks from the night before looked deeper now, fresh, as if claws had scraped the wood again while they slept. Daniel's jaw tightened. Someone, or something, was warning him, leaving signs that they knew where he lived. The girl refused to eat that morning. She sat near the fire, her knees pulled close, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak of the wood made her flinch. Every gust of wind made her shrink closer to the chair. Daniel tried to distract her, showing her how to hold a wooden spoon, letting her stir the stew. For a moment she smiled faintly, her glowing eyes softening. But the moment was fragile, broken when a loud thump sounded from outside, like heavy boots striking the ground. Daniel grabbed his rifle, motioning for the girl to stay put. He stepped outside, scanning the yard. The wind whistled through the trees, but the forest was silent, too silent. No birds, no animals, just stillness. On the ground near the edge of the trees, he saw something. A piece of fabric, torn and dark, half buried in the dirt. He picked it up, rubbing the rough texture between his fingers. It wasn't from his cabin. It wasn't from her clothes either. It belonged to someone else. Someone who had been close when he returned inside. The girl's eyes locked on the fabric. She froze, her body stiff, and then she began shaking her head. Tears welled up, and she whispered in her alien tongue again, repeating words faster and faster. Her small hand clutched Daniel's sleeve, refusing to let go. She didn't need to speak his language for him to understand. Whoever left that cloth behind, she feared them more than death. That night, Daniel barred the door and windows. He stoked the fire higher, keeping the rifle close. The girl wouldn't sleep. She sat awake on the couch, eyes wide and shining in the firelight. At one point, she crawled closer to him, resting against his arm. Her small frame trembled, but her presence carried something powerful, a silent plea. "Don't leave me." The hours dragged on, and then, deep into the night, a sound split the silence. A long, low howl, not an animal's cry, but something deeper, sharper, filled with rage. The girl covered her ears and pressed her face against Daniel's side. Her body shook violently and she whispered that same fearful word over and over again. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes scanning the window. The howl faded, but it left behind an echo of dread that clung to the cabin walls. He realized this was no random threat. Something was hunting her, something intelligent enough to leave warnings and cruel enough to enjoy fear. At dawn, the world outside looked normal again. Birds chirped. The sun broke through the clouds. But Daniel knew the danger was closer than ever. When he opened the door, the ground outside was disturbed. Fresh tracks circled the cabin, long clawed footprints that did not belong to any creature he knew. They had been surrounded while they slept. The girl stood behind him, clutching his jacket, her glowing eyes brimmed with tears. But there was also something else in them now. A trust, a belief that he was the only thing standing between her and the nightmare beyond. Daniel looked at the forest, then at the claw marks, then back at her, and in that moment, he knew this was no longer just about survival. It was war, one he hadn't asked for, but one he could not walk away from. The first signs of danger had already arrived, and whatever was coming next, it would strike soon, very soon. The third morning began with heavy clouds rolling across the sky. The forest felt heavier, quieter, as though it was holding its breath. Daniel stepped outside with his rifle slung across his shoulder, scanning the tree line. He had not slept much, the memory of the howl still sharp in his mind. The little alien girl clung to the doorway, her glowing eyes watching him carefully as if afraid he might vanish. He tried to act calm for her sake, but his nerves were burning. The tracks around the cabin were too many, too deliberate. Whoever was out there wanted him to know. They could come closer any time they wished. By noon, the air grew thicker and even the birds fell silent again. Daniel was chopping wood when the girl suddenly froze. Her head snapped toward the forest, her eyes wide, her body trembling. She whispered that same fearful word he had heard. Before, her voice breaking with terror, Daniel followed her gaze, and that's when he saw them. Two tall figures emerged from the trees, moving slowly but with purpose. They were alien women, taller than him, their skin the same silver-blue glow as the little girl, though darker in shade. Their long hair shimmered in strange colors under the dim light, and their sharp eyes locked on him with something between anger and judgment. They stopped just outside, the fence of his yard, their posture strong, their presence overwhelming. The girl let out a sharp cry and rushed back inside the cabin, slamming the door shut behind her. Daniel turned, rifle in hand, his heart pounding. One of the women raised, her hand palm open, showing she carried no weapon, but her voice was firm, cold, carrying authority even though Daniel could not understand her words. She spoke in the same alien tongue as the girl, her voice commanding. The other woman stepped forward, her sharp gaze scanning the cabin, the yard, and finally Daniel himself. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle. He didn't raise it, but he didn't lower it either. "What do you want?" he asked. Though he knew they could not understand his language, the first woman took another step forward and spoke again, slower this time, pointing toward the cabin. Her long finger aimed directly at the door where the little girl was hiding. Daniel didn't need translation. She had come for the child inside, the girl screamed. A desperate cry filled with fear. She shouted words in her language, fast and panicked. The alien women's expressions hardened, and one of them shouted, "Back," their voices sharp like knives. Daniel's chest tightened. It was clear. The girl didn't want to go with them. Her cries were not of relief but of terror, and that changed everything. He raised his hand slowly, gesturing for the women to stay back. "You're not taking her," he said firmly, his voice low. Even if they couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear in his tone and stance. The taller woman's eyes narrowed. She said something to the other, and they both stepped closer. Daniel's finger twitched near the trigger, but he held his ground. This wasn't the battlefield. Not yet, but one wrong move, and it could turn into one. Inside the cabin, the girl pushed the curtain aside just enough for her glowing eyes to peek out. Her face was wet with tears, but her gaze was locked on Daniel. She was waiting to see if he would give her up or stand for her. The moment stretched like a blade between them all. The forest, the cabin, even the wind seemed to stop. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he faced the two alien women. They had power, size, and perhaps even weapons hidden. But he had something stronger, the trust of the child who now looked to him as her protector. Finally, the first woman lowered her hand, her sharp eyes never leaving his face. She said something in a low, threatening tone, and then turned away. The second woman gave him one last burning look before following. Together, they melted back into the forest, their tall frames swallowed by the shadows. Daniel exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath the entire time. His grip on the rifle loosened, but his nerves were still on fire. He stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. The girl rushed to him at once, clutching his sleeve with both hands. Her small body shook as she buried her face against him. Her voice trembled as she spoke again and again, repeating words in her tongue that he could not understand, but he didn't need to. Her tears, her grip, her fear, they told him everything. He sat on the chair, holding the rifle in one hand and the child close with the other. He stared into the fire, his mind heavy. This wasn't random anymore. This wasn't chance. They had found her. They had come for her. And they would return. The bond between him and the little alien girl had been sealed in silence. But tonight, that silence was broken. The first strangers had come knocking, and the war for her safety had just begun. The fire in Daniel's cabin burned low that night, but the room was heavy with silence. The little alien girl sat close to him, her glowing eyes still wet with tears. She hadn't let go of his sleeve since the two tall women had appeared earlier. That day, every time the wind rattled the window, she flinched, her small body trembling as if she feared they would break down the door. Daniel stroked her tangled hair gently, his mind racing. He had questions burning inside him, questions she could not answer, at least not with words he could understand. But somehow, he had to know. Why had she been abandoned in the forest? Why did those women come for her with such anger in their eyes? And most of all, what secret was this child carrying that made her so valuable and so hunted? He decided to try. Taking a piece of charcoal from the fireplace, he drew a simple figure on a scrap of wood, a stick figure meant to represent her. The girl tilted her head, watching curiously. Then he drew two tall figures beside it, their glowing eyes marked clearly. He pointed toward the door and mimicked knocking, repeating the moment when the women arrived. Her face fell, her glowing eyes filled with fear again. She shook her head violently, clutching his hand as if to say, "Don't let them take me." Then trembling, she grabbed the charcoal from his hand and drew her own lines on the wood. Her small fingers moved quickly, almost desperately. When she was finished, Daniel leaned closer, his chest tightening at what he saw. She had drawn herself smaller than the others, with a mark on her chest, a glowing star-like symbol. Then, she drew the two women again, their arms reaching for her, their faces sharp. Finally, she drew a larger figure behind them, a monstrous outline with long claws and wide eyes. Towering over all, Daniel stared, his pulse rising. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the meaning. The women weren't rescuers, they were enforcers, and the child wasn't just a lost girl. She was something far more important, something her people wanted controlled or destroyed. The girl pointed to the star mark she had drawn on her chest, then pressed her glowing hand against her own heart. She whispered a word, soft but clear. Repeating it like a fragile prayer, Daniel couldn't translate it, but he knew it was the key, the thing that made her special, the thing that put her in danger. For the first time, Daniel realized the truth. This child wasn't just running from cruelty. She was carrying something inside her, something her own kind feared, perhaps power, perhaps knowledge, or maybe even a bloodline they wanted erased. Daniel leaned back, the weight of it pressing down on him. If he kept her, he would be standing against her entire people, maybe even against laws older than his own world. But when he looked at her, small and shaking, her glowing eyes full of desperate trust, he knew there was no choice left. She was his responsibility now. The night deepened, and Daniel tried to keep the cabin quiet. But sometime past midnight, a sound broke the silence. The soft crunch of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. Daniel froze. His rifle already in his hands, the girl's eyes went wide, glowing brighter in the dark. She whispered that fearful word again, her voice sharp with panic. He motioned for her to stay low, then crept toward the window. Through the gap in the shutters, he saw them, shadows moving, tall figures standing just beyond the firelight, watching, waiting, not attacking, not speaking, just letting him know they were there. His chest tightened. This was no rescue party. This was a hunt. Hours passed, with the watchers outside, and only when dawn began to break did they slip away into the trees. Daniel dropped into the chair, exhaustion flooding his bones. The girl curled up beside him, clutching his arm, her breathing quick but steady. He realized then that the two women had not left in defeat. They had left in warning. They would be back, stronger, angrier, and maybe with more behind them. As the morning light filled the cabin, Daniel whispered to himself, "She's not just a child to them. She's a threat." And the truth cut deeper than he expected. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was defying an entire alien power that wanted her erased. But when the girl finally smiled faintly, pressing her glowing hand against his chest, as though claiming him as family, Daniel knew something else too. She had chosen him, and whatever storm was coming, he would face it because the truth was revealed now. The child carried something her people feared, and that made her the most dangerous and the most precious life Daniel had ever held in his hands. Daniel woke to the sound of silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, heavy and unnatural. The little alien girl still slept curled on the couch, wrapped in his old jacket, her glowing eyes half hidden beneath tired lids. But Daniel's instincts were restless, whispering danger into his bones. He stood, checked the rifle leaning against the wall, and looked out the window. The forest was still, but too still. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the weight of unseen eyes. The memory of the two alien women burned in his mind. Their sharp voices, their cold stares, their promise of return. And the drawings the girl had made. The star mark on her chest, the monstrous figure behind the women. The truth had been revealed, and now Daniel understood. He was not just protecting a child, he was standing against a law, against a people who believed this girl should not exist. The door creaked softly, and the girl stirred awake. She blinked at him, confusion in her glowing eyes, then fear as she noticed the rifle in his hands. Daniel knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said, though his voice was firm. "But if they come back, we don't run, we stand." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her small hand reached out, pressing against his chest again where his heart beat steady and strong. A silent promise. She trusted him. Hours passed. The sky darkened with rolling clouds, and then the sound came. The crunch of boots, the shifting of branches, the slow advance of something large. Daniel set the girl behind the table, gesturing for her to stay low. His muscles tightened as he lifted the rifle and stepped toward the door. A knock, slow, deliberate, echoing through the cabin. Daniel gritted his teeth and opened the door, his rifle raised. There they stood again, the two alien women, this time closer, stronger, their eyes glowing faint in the shadows, and behind them, shapes moved among the trees, others waiting. Watching, the taller woman stepped forward, speaking in her alien tongue, her voice sharp with command. She pointed inside, her long finger demanding the child. Daniel shook his head. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly, though he knew they didn't understand the words. Still, his stance, his tone, his weapon, they told them enough. The second woman hissed, anger flashing in her eyes. She spoke fast, her voice cutting like a blade. The little girl inside cried out, shouting back in her own tongue, her voice trembling. Her words carried pain and fear, but also defiance. She didn't want to go, and she wanted Daniel to know it. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. He stepped outside fully now, planting his boots in the dirt between the women and the cabin. "This is my line," he growled. And you don't cross it. The first woman tilted her head, studying him. Her sharp eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Daniel saw something almost like respect flicker in them. A strange recognition that this human would not break easily, but it only hardened her resolve. She barked an order, and the shadows behind her shifted. More figures moved in the forest, their glowing eyes flickering like stars between the trees. Daniel's heart hammered, but he didn't lower his rifle. If they rushed him, he knew he couldn't win against all of them. But he also knew one thing. He would not surrender the one. Girl, not now, not ever. The air thickened. The standoff stretched long. The little girl peeked through the window, her eyes locked on him. Her small hands clutched the frame, her lips whispering a single word again and again. A prayer, or maybe his name. Finally, the tall woman raised her hand, signaling the others to hold. Her voice softened, but the weight in her tone carried threat. She pointed at Daniel, then at the child, then at the forest. It was a warning clear enough. This isn't over. Next time we won't ask. Then, as quickly as they had come, they withdrew, melting back into the trees. The forest swallowed them whole, but Daniel knew the danger had only grown. He lowered his rifle, his chest burning with adrenaline. When he stepped back inside, the girl ran to him at once, wrapping her arms around his waist. Her glowing eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice whispered softly, a single sound filled with trust. Daniel placed a hand on her head. He stared into the fire, his jaw set hard. They would return, stronger, angrier, with more soldiers. But he had made his stand, and he would not bend. She was no longer just an alien girl he had found in the forest. She was family now, and for family, he would fight to the very end. The storm outside built slowly, thunder rolling in the distance, and with it, Daniel knew, came the storm of battle. But in his heart, something burned brighter than fear. He had drawn a line in the dirt, and he would not let anyone, alien or otherwise, cross it. The humans' stand had begun, and the galaxy would soon learn what it meant to face a man with nothing to lose and everything to protect. The storm rolled in by nightfall. Thunder shook the cabin walls and rain hammered against the roof. The little alien girl sat beside the fire, clutching Daniel's jacket tightly, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. She didn't speak, but her silence carried weight. She knew what Daniel already feared. The women would return, and when they did, they wouldn't come alone. Daniel paced the room, checking his rifle, sharpening the old hunting knife, moving tools and supplies into reach. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he had survived enough battles to know when a fight was coming. The forest had been whispering it for days, and tonight, it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The girl tugged on his sleeve, pointing toward the window. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Father," she said in broken human tongue. Daniel froze, his chest tightening. She had never spoken a word of his language before. But now, with fear in her voice, she had chosen that word. Not protector, not friend, but father. For a long moment, Daniel could only stare at her, her glowing eyes full of trust, her fragile body shaking but still clinging to him. He placed a rough hand on her head, pulling her close. The bond between them was no longer silent, no longer uncertain. She was his daughter now. No matter what blood ran in her veins, and that made his choice simple. He would fight, not because of duty, not because of pride, but because he could not let her be taken. The hours dragged on, the storm outside louder than ever. Then, as lightning split the sky, Daniel saw them, figures moving at the edge of the trees, glowing eyes cutting through the dark. This time it wasn't just the two women, it was more. Half a dozen, maybe more, surrounding the cabin like wolves. The girl whimpered, clutching him tighter. Daniel pulled her behind the table, his voice calm but steady. "Stay down no matter what happens." The first strike came sudden. The door rattled, then splintered as something slammed against it. Daniel raised the rifle, firing a warning shot through the wood. The crack of thunder swallowed the sound, but outside, the figures froze for a moment. Then a sharp voice called out, It was the tall woman, her tone filled with fury. She shouted words in her alien tongue. The meaning was clear enough. Give her up or die. Daniel's jaw tightened. He shouted back, his voice loud. She's mine now. You want her? You'll have to come through me. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the storm. Then the attack began. The window shattered, claws reaching through. Daniel swung the butt of his rifle, slamming it against the intruding arm. The girl screamed, curling tighter behind. The table. Another figure rushed the door, smashing it open with brute force. Daniel fired, the blast lighting the room. The alien fell back, growling in pain but not dead. The fight was brutal. Daniel fought like a cornered wolf, every strike fueled by something deeper than rage. Love. The little girl's cries gave him strength. He moved fast, blocking one attack, striking back with the knife, firing again. His body burned, cuts opened on his arms, his chest heaved. With effort, but he did not fall. The women stood outside, watching, waiting. They had not entered yet. But their eyes glowed with cold judgment, Daniel realized. They wanted to see if he would break, if he would give up before they finished him. But Daniel didn't break. He stood bleeding, breathing hard, his rifle raised again. The storm roared behind him. The fire burned bright beside him, and the child clung to his jacket. And in that moment, the alien women saw it too. This human was not bending. This human was not giving her up. One of the women stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. She spoke in her tongue, sharp and furious. The girl shouted back, her small voice filled with defiance. She pressed her glowing hand against her chest, pointing at Daniel, then shouted again. The meaning was clear, even without translation. He is my father now. The woman froze, her face twisting with anger and disbelief. She hissed a final warning, then raised her hand, signaling the others. One by one, the glowing eyes vanished into the trees, swallowed by the storm. The women lingered last, their sharp stares burning into Daniel. Then they too disappeared. The cabin was silent again, except for the storm. Daniel lowered the rifle, his body shaking, his breath ragged. The girl ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, her glowing eyes wet with tears. She whispered, the word again clearer this time. Father. Daniel pulled her close, closing his eyes. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. They would come again, maybe with armies, maybe with laws and threats he could not yet imagine. But it didn't matter because tonight he had made his stand, and tonight the galaxy had learned a simple truth. A human man with nothing left to lose will fight harder than any army, and when he fights for family, he cannot be broken. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, a new bond had been forged, not of blood, not of language, but of choice, a new family, and a new fight, one that would echo far beyond the walls of a lonely cabin in the woods.